Hello and welcome to this chess endgame review on Zugzwang. Now, some of you may ask, what is Zugzwang? Well, it's a word of German origin that means roughly compulsion to move or forced move. So basically, it's a position in chess where whoever's turn it is to make the move, whatever move they make will worsen their position. And so this first example here demonstrates this. So in this position, it is white's turn to move, and basically whatever move he makes, and this position is simplified because he only has one move that he can make, but it will worsen his position, causing him to lose. So hopefully you can see what the worst move or what his move is and what it will result in. So here, king to a5 would be a checkmate. So that's the only move that white can make, and he will lose the game immediately after that move. So king to a5 is forced, and then the rook moves over here and checkmates. So let's move on to another example of Zugzwang. All right. And so this next example probably didn't cover up the moves in time, but here it is black's turn to move, and once again, this is a simplified form of Zugzwang, however it's pronounced. But he can only move away, and because it's his turn to move, it will result in a lost game. Now, the opposite here, if it was white's turn to move, he would go from a winning game to only a draw, because if white had to move here, he would either have to move away from his pawn and black could capture it, or he would have to move here to protect the pawn, but then a stalemate would happen. And so in this game here, if we look at the moves, so black is forced to move here, and that move will worsen his position because now he has to move away, and this lets the king, the white king, come up here and guard the queening square, and then after another move, the pawn will promote to a queen and white would win here. All right, let's take a look at some other examples, and these examples will slowly increase in difficulty. I should have covered this up, but you probably already saw it by now. So in this position, this is another example of Zugzwang, where whoever's turn it is to move will worsen their position. And in this case, whoever's turn it is to move will also lose. This is also a endgame technique here called the trebuchet, because the kings are in a position where they're each protecting their pawn, but whoever's turn it is kind of gets flung away from their pawn, allowing the other king, the enemy king, to capture their pawn and escort that king's pawn up for a promotion to queen, and the game would be won. So here's an example. Let's see. So we'll see how this plays out. So here, with white to move, white would be forced to move away from the protection of this pawn, because he can't move to d5 here because the black pawn is covering that square. So he'd have to move away, and now the pawn can be captured, and if white tries to go down and get in front of the opposing pawn, it's too late because the king is already up in front of his pawn, and so he can help escort it and keep the opposition here, where he keeps one move in between and guards these three squares in between the kings and kind of blocks out the white king. So then the game would just proceed with this. And finally, the pawn would move up. And if the white king tried to guard the queening square, black could just move over and protect it. And then the pawn could just press forward until it queens, and black would win in that position. All right, on to another example. I'll try and cover up the lines so it doesn't give it away. All right, there we go. And it, I don't know, it kind of does it so fast it reverts back for some reason to showing the answer. All right, so here we have, let's see, in this position, another Zugzwang where here it is black's turn to move. Excuse me, actually, let me make sure here. Okay, it is white's turn to move in this position. So white can set up a Zugzwang in this position. Can you figure out how he does that? Of course, white is winning in this position, and there are many ways to win, but the quickest way to win would be this. So after here, a mate and 2, king to g3. So what this does, it sets up a Zugzwang position where black is forced to make one and only one move, and it worsens his position and it's losing. So he has to move here, and then the rook moves in for a checkmate. So that is a simple Zugzwang to remember for endgame positions. And now we'll go on to another example. And these will get a little more difficult here. I tried to cover everything up, but let's see. So once again, it's white is winning in this position. So here it's black's turn to move. And this is another example of Zugzwang where whatever black does, it will be worsening black's position. And this is also a good example of opposition, which I will cover in the next video after this one that I put out. So here, opposition is when there's one square in between the kings here, and whoever's move it is will have to retreat. So the side whose move it is not has the opposition. So it's not white's move. He has the opposition because black will be forced into a bad position by either moving away or stepping to the side. And so we'll see what happens in this game. So here we have the black king forced to step to the side, and this allows the white king to move up into the position here. And if the king tries to get in front of this passed pawn, we have a capture of this pawn, and as the king moves over, white could just move to the side here, and then eventually he would make headway. He would even have the option to abandon this pawn, capture this one, and then promote this pawn as well. So the game could play out in different ways, but here the pawn is promoted to a queen. But back to the beginning position here, as soon as the black king has to step aside, this just allows the white king to move in, and now he is winning here as soon as he is able to pick off this pawn and have a passed pawn. All right, on to the next example here, number 6. All right, so in this position, it is, let's see here. All right, so here it is the white's turn to move. What do you think is the best move for white to play here? And of course, in this position, white would be winning no matter what, but he can force a Zugzwang position immediately in this. And here, I'll go back to the analysis. All right, so here there are multiple moves that are good, but if he plays this, then it forces black to whatever he does, he'll be in trouble. So if he pushes forward, then you have this move, and Zugzwang is reached again here, where now he's forced to move there and a mate. So those are fairly basic, unless you're still learning. These are some interesting positions to look at. All right, let's move on to another one here. Example number 7. Try to cover that up quick. All right, here's another interesting position where it's black's turn to move here. And black is slightly ahead, but how does he finish off the game here? What is the best move in this position? Pause the video if you want to look at it and take a longer time. If not, let's take a look here. So if I go to the analysis, so here black is winning, and here it shows, this is interesting. If queen to h4 is played, or queen to f6, it looks like the game could end up as a draw. And black would have to be careful here, but if king to h7 is played, which is probably a harder move to find in this position, king to h7. And so what this does, it puts white in the Zugzwang position where whatever he does, he's going to have problems and worsen his position. So let's look at some examples of how that could play out. If he plays rook to g2, well then we have queen to f1 check. And if the rook moves down here to protect the bishop, because the queen forked the king and the bishop, so now the rook is protecting the bishop, we have a checkmate with queen to h3 here, and the king is trapped and checkmated. So that's one possible way things could play out after this king to h7 move, if the rook attacks the queen. So we see that we see that rook to g2 move is bad because of this queen fork here, and then a mate on h3. So another possibility is, well, before I jump into this bishop move to h5, we see that if the bishop tries to move, it's very limited on where it can go. If it goes to c2, the queen can just capture. If it goes to b3, we have a fork by the queen moving the queen to f3, attacking the king and the bishop at the same time. And also if the bishop moves up to a4, another fork by the queen, attacking on h4, checking the king and just picking off the bishop. And so then of course the bishop can't go to e2 or f3 because the queen would just capture. So other possibilities are, let's see, bishop to h5 here, but then we have queen to h4 check, and then the king is forced to move. But there's a little trick here. If the queen immediately captures, then the game is a draw because of this move, rook to h1, pinning the queen to the king, and they would just exchange the rook and the queen, and it would be a draw. And so after this rook move, here I'll go back to the beginning. After the bishop moves up here, and the queen checks, and the king moves, remember that the queen cannot capture, or the rook will pin the queen to the king here. So queen to g5 check must be played first. And then this forces the king to move. And if he moves here, or moves back to the H file, the queen will just capture and check the king. If the king moves away to the F file, then the queen can capture and not worry about this rook pinning the queen anymore. So that is one way that it would play out if this bishop to h5 move is played at the beginning. So if we go back after king to h7 at the very beginning of the position, and then here another option is rook to g4, but then we have queen to f1 check, forking the bishop and the king. And here, remember, if rook to g1 is played to block this check and protect the bishop, then it's a mate by the queen on h3, like we showed earlier. So if the king moves, then here the queen just captures the bishop and is ahead here, and the rook is under attack. So queen versus rook should be winning. It may take a little while to complete that checkmate and to win in queen versus rook, but it should be winning. And then one more example in this position. So if we go back to the very beginning, after black's move king to h7, which sets up this Zugzwang, one other position to look at is the bishop retreating up here where it's protected. But once again, we have this queen to h4 check move, which forces the king out to g2, and then the queen can capture. And black should be winning. It may be not the easiest game to win with queen versus rook, but black should be able to win. All right. Let's see. That example was a little bit longer, so let's jump into the last few examples here. So number 8. Try and hide that. All right. So in this position, it is black's turn to move, and we see that white should be winning. Even though the material is even here, white will set up a Zugzwang position. And the key factor in this position, we see that black is protecting this pawn here, the c pawn, but he has no other moves to protect this pawn. So once white is able to go here to d6 and take the opposition from black, it can force black away and white will be able to pick off the c pawn. But before that happens, the game will continue with, let's see here, what do you think white should do in this position? Pause it if you want to look at the position further, but if not, let's look here. Okay, so here we have king to d6 played immediately to grab the opposition against the king, or g4, and the computer recommends g4, so we can take a look at that. So after g4, black moves one of his pawns, and now the king can grab the opposition on the second move, or he could have done that immediately. But then black tries to make moves that will prevent him from falling into a Zugzwang position, but white can just move again, and black is in Zugzwang. Whatever he does, if he moves this, now white can just move forward, and black is forced to move. But whatever he does, it will worsen his position because he's in Zugzwang. So he has to move away from his pawn. White can capture, and even if he takes the opposition here, white has this extra passed pawn and can move towards these pawns on the king side. If black tries to block or stop the white king, well, then white can just press this pawn forward, and black is stuck trying to protect this outside passed pawn from turning into a queen. And so after the pawn moves forward, black stays in front of the pawn to block it. And now the king can abandon this pawn and just eat up all these pawns on the king side over here and allow his pawns to promote. And so the game may go like this. Capture. And now white could even move back here and block black. And so this gives this pawn time to promote here. And now this pawn is even protected. And so white would win in this position as he is ahead by this queen. And so white shouldn't have any problems. It looks like mate in 17 moves. But all right, on to the next one. Example number 9. All right. Okay. In this position, see if I can remember whose turn it is to move. Well, let's see what's going on in this position. Okay, it is white's turn to move in this position and set up a Zugzwang position for black. So whatever black will do after, if white picks the correct move, it will be a winning position for white, even though the material is even. But how does white do this? So take a look at it, see if you can figure it out. Pause the video if you have to think longer. Otherwise, let's find out here. All right. So it looks like white has to be careful because the game could easily turn into a draw. But for white to win, he has to play back to e4 here. And so what this does is put black in a Zugzwang position where whatever he does will be worse for him. It will worsen his position, and it looks like by the evaluation white is winning here. So if the king moves here, it will be checked by the rook, which will allow this pawn to promote. But black is kind of out of options here. If the rook moves, well then the rook can check the king where he's at on f6. So it is just bad news here for black in this position. So let's say he goes to e6. Well, the game could play out like this. Rook check. If the king moves out of check, the pawn promotes. And then possibly a check. But there are too many pieces here. The queen is so powerful, black will just be attacked by the rook and the queen. Now this pawn has been captured, and if the king moves, the rook will be captured. So once that pawn was promoted, it was pretty much over for black. All right, let's take another look at example number 10. All right, try and cover that up. Okay, in this position, it is black's turn to move. And he is ahead in material here, but he is in a Zugzwang position. Whatever black does will worsen his position here. So take a look at it and see if you can figure out why that is, why black is having a losing position here. All right, I'm going to look at the analysis here. Okay, it looks like whatever black does, he has problems. The computer says the best move is to capture this pawn here on d5, but then that will just allow this pawn to promote up here. So the king is trying to keep an eye on this pawn on d5 and stop this b pawn. Right now, if the b pawn moves forward, black could just move to c7 and capture it. But right now, this d pawn is preventing the black king from moving over and attacking this pawn. And the b pawn is covering the c7 square. So the king's kind of blocked out here. He can't move his pawn. If he just moves his king down, the pawn will advance and the knight or the king will not be able to stop it. So one example is to move the knight, and also the knight is kind of trapped by the king here. If the knight cannot go to f7 or f6 or h6. So what move is left for the knight? Maybe knight to e7. But now, if that is played, we have this. The king must stop that pawn. And then a check, forking these two pieces. And so if the king captures here, this pawn will promote. If the king captures the b pawn, then this capture occurs and the pawn will promote on e8. And so, the king would not be able to get back in time. So if we go back and look at that position again, let's see, after e7, once that pawn promotes, it looks like, what is another possibility? What if the knight tried this? Well, then it looks like the knight is just captured. And then the king would have to go up here to stop this. Like that. But then we have this move. And now the king cannot stop both of these pawns. If he takes one, the other moves. And so what does he do here? If he tries to block one, the other promotes. So that was an interesting possibility as well. All right, on to the final example of Zugzwang. Example number 11. All right, I'll try and cover that up quick. You may have already seen what is played out here, but this is an interesting example where it is white's turn to move here. And what do you think is the best move here for white? All right, let's take a look. Okay, this game also could easily become a draw, but it looks like the best move for white is king to b1. So this sets up a Zugzwang position where whatever black does, it's just going to worsen his position. And so we see that black must protect this pawn on b2 here with his rook. And he also has to keep an eye on this h pawn, and the king is stuck guarding this pawn on c7. As soon as this pawn, as soon as the king would move out, this pawn could promote to a queen with check on the king. And so black is very limited on his options here. And so the computer recommends rook to g2 as best. Other examples are rook to f2, rook to d2. So let's see if the the rook moves away from protecting this pawn. Then this allows rook to c4, which after black moves away from the protection of this pawn, it allows the rook to move forward, and that will allow this pawn to push up to h4 next. So after going back here, guarding the pawn, now the pawn can push forward, and black is in Zugzwang again here. So he's forced to move away from covering this pawn, and now the rook can just keep moving forward. If he goes back, the pawn pushes forward, and this will just happen again and again until now the rook is blocked. But we have the rook moving again, and now this pawn is not protected. But h7 is played anyway. And so if we have rook to h2 going after this, then the game could play out like this. The rook moves away, and now if the pawn is captured, rook to a8 could be played, and if this pawn is captured, we have a skewer here where the king is being attacked and is forced to move out of the way, and then as soon as he moves, this final rook will be picked off. And even if white captures this pawn, rook and king against king is winning for the side with extra material. And so if we go back to this position, after h7 is played, we looked at rook to h2 attacking this pawn. Let's see, another example might be, or a possibility, is rook to f8. So, excuse me. So rook to f8, trying to stop this pawn. Well, then the game could play out with rook to g6 here. And so in this position, if the rook tries to move here to block this pawn and attack it, we just have rook to g8, checking, and this could play out with, let's see, let's say this happens instead. Well, then rook to g8, excuse me. That's just jumping forward. Hold on. All right, let's go back. Rook to f8. If rook to g6 is played, and we looked at what happens if the king just captures. Well, then rook to g8 can be played. So rook to g8, and this pawn will promote, or if there's a capture, the pawn will recapture and promote to a queen. So anyway, that is one possibility after this pawn moves up here. So another example after this h2 move, and then we looked at rook to a6, causing all kinds of problems because of this possible check, or if the rook captures the h pawn. Let's see here, hold on. We looked at this move, which allowed this, and then this, and rook to a7. So if we go back, all right, did it take me back to the beginning? Come on. All right, sorry about that, everybody. There's so much stuff to click on here. So after this pawn moves forward with h7, let's go back to that. And then h2 is played to guard this pawn. Another possibility is, let's see, after rook to a6, we saw that the rook cannot capture here. Another possibility is the king moving down here. But then we have queen, capture, and this, capture, and rook to a8 here. So that is another possibility. And also, if the king does not move, if we had king captures, which I think we may have looked at this already, rook to a8, and if this is played, a check, well, the king can just capture that and then check. And if black just tries to check, the king would work its way up here and help protect the pawn or attack this rook. And so black couldn't make any headway. So eventually this pawn would either promote, or if he captures, we have this skewer again. So anyway, sorry, I had a little computer issues there. But this has been a review of the Zugzwang position, which is once again a word of German origin that roughly means compulsion to move or forced move. Where basically it's your turn to move or your opponent's, and whatever move the person in Zugzwang makes, it will worsen his position, causing him to lose or just his position to become worse and unfavorable. And he would rather pass his move on, but you can't do that in chess. So you're forced to play a move that you wish not to play. All right. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions. And I hope you enjoyed this chess endgame review on Zugzwang. Thank you and have a great day.